Good evening, everyone. We continue our study in the book of Daniel. We're now in chapter 7, and we ended with verse 6. I just want to highlight a little bit of verse 6 as we get into verse 7, which we will start today. If you take a look at verse 6, it says, "After this, I kept looking and I was seeing, or I saw." So, behold means I saw another one of the monsters. And then here we say, after this, I kept looking, but it adds these words in the night visions, and behold, and saw. There is a phrase that is added, which is this in the night visions. And this tells us that it is another night. The first three monsters that Daniel saw was the first three that came out of the turbulent sea, the great sea, as the four divine creatures were stirring up. The first three creatures, as it changes one to another, we first saw a lion looking animal that had eagle wings, and then the wings were plucked out, and then it stood up on two legs, and then he was given a human heart, and that depicts the kingdom of Babylon. The next animal that came out of the turbulency, and as the scene changes, the monster became the second one, which was a bear-looking animal, huge big bear on 2 feet, and then he stands on one side, meaning favoring one leg, and then in his teeth were three ribs. There we are told, as we compare the features, that this was the Medo Persian Empire. At the time of Daniel, he doesn't know this. We know it today because we are looking backwards. All he can see is the first one being Babylon, because that's the tail end of the Babylonian era. We also see in verse 6 right here that the third looking beast was one like a leopard, which has four wings of a bird. And we also said that the statement ends here so that we know that it is a leopard looking monster with four wings. And it depicts the Grecian Empire, particularly Alexander the Great, because in the second part, the beast acquired four heads. The four heads was added to the animal. So the animal now, instead of having one head in a leopard-looking animal, now has four heads. And dominion was given to it, means the official powers were given to it. And we had said that these were the four generals that took over from Alexander the Great. We were of particular interest in Ptolemy, who started the Egyptian kingdom, Seleucus, who started the Assyrian Babylonia area where he had the Seleucid Empire. Then Antigonus took Persia and Asia Minor, and we have Alexander's brother Philip taking Macedonia. And of particular interest were only the two, Ptolemy and Seleucus. Now, before we carry on with verse 7, I would like us to bear in mind that we shouldn't get too engrossed with all the details. In fact, when Daniel wrote this down, he only gave us the highlight of the dreams and visions, meaning he was not giving us elaborate description of every single scene that he had seen in that vision. And so he gave us highlights, enough details to understand the corresponding kingdom that we can actually compare when the time came. And so we will not really be burdened by the details, but suffice to assign the comparison to a known kingdom, particularly when we also compare this to Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel chapter 2 of the metallic image. Now, in verse 7, most of us are unaware that this happens on another night, also in a night vision, meaning it takes place in the night, and in the dream itself, it's also nighttime. In Jewish thinking, that nighttime scenario is very much a depiction that they are still in exile, in a sense that they are not in their own kingdom because there is no king and they are not in full control of their destiny. And here he sees a fourth monster. And the monster here is described as dreadful, terrible, extremely strong. We need just to uh, carefully just take a look at this particular animal. Now, this particular animal, it begins to describe as something that is fearsome. I think fearsome is a good word here. Fearsome, meaning it it infuses fear when you look at it. Makes you very afraid, I guess. The second word here is terrible. And the idea of terrible here really gives us the connotation that uh, it is a very terrifying, I guess you can say that, a very terrifying uh, feel. Now, terrifying is is very similar to dreadful, fearsome, because it causes terror in the heart. It 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 leads one to feel very small and afraid that you will be trembling inside. Now, the third word here is extremely strong, and this is a good translation. Extremely strong, extremely powerful in terms of strength. These are three particular characteristics of this kingdom. And you find that there is a slight difference. The first three monsters that Daniel saw all came from the sea, came onto the land, and came as a somewhat identifiable character type of animal. For example, a lion looking with eagle like wings, a bear looking monster that stands on one leg, then a leopard looking monster, but it has four wings. And then suddenly, from one head, it becomes four heads. The language that was used is to help us who didn't see the dream now being able to visualize a lion, for example, a bear, and a leopard, and wings. But when it comes to the fourth monster, Daniel had trouble describing. And so he tries to describe this monster as something that infuses fear in him, causes him to tremble, terrifying. And it seems that he is extremely strong and had large teeth. Now it's describing the monster from the head up. So if you think of it, it might look something like this. It is a big monster that has a fearful looking face. And then it seems that it can somehow, perhaps from the sound, the voice of this animal, it gives that kind of a feeling to the observer. But it has large iron teeth. So, iron teeth, and I just draw it this way for the lack of any detail. It's just to conjure the imagery that it's got very big, strong teeth, and iron is the similar composition of the fourth uh, metal that was in the metallic image of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Starts with gold, then with silver, then with bronze, and then the two links of iron. And here it uses the same iron teeth. The iron is the strongest of all the metal, and so it has very strong teeth and big. And the description here tells us that it was able to devour and crush. And then we have something else. It says here, trample down the remainder with its feet. The next part that we can imagine, I guess, it says it 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 eats a lot. Now, this word devour literally means it eats a lot. And the second part of crushing means it breaks into pieces, meaning whatever goes into the mouth all comes out in pieces. And the third description is that it can actually trample whatever he did not eat with the feet. And so the feet itself was able to trample down, and whatever was from the teeth, he can actually break everything into pieces. Now, that is the kind of imagery that we're given. It's a horrible looking thing, which Daniel was not able to say, well, is that a lion or a bear or a leopard? It's none. It's just something that came out of the sea, which we are saying that it's one of those that popped out of the sea according to verse 3, just like the rest, and we don't talk about the rest anymore. But the strange thing is, he has no words to describe this. And so it is a horrible beast. And then we see these words, and it was different from all the beasts that were before it. It has changed into something that nothing in the three other beasts, the first three, had any resemblance. And so you don't recognize it as Babylon, you don't recognize it as Medo Persia, you don't recognize it as Greece. And so, who is this? And it has 10 horns. And so we can complete the picture. And so, with this, it is a very strange animal that has so many horns, 10 of these, 10 horns. And that is why Daniel just can't use any normal language to describe. It is scary. I guess today, when we look at verse 7, we won't call it a dream, okay? We probably would say that Daniel is having a nightmare because he is having a terrible time trying to look at this particular animal, a beast or a monster. Verse 8 says, "Well, I was thinking about the horns." This word thinking is is something that we need to understand. This is contemplating. Contemplating. It's like thinking, but it is thinking about what exactly is he looking at. So this word contemplating is trying to help us understand that Daniel was looking hard and looking closely at this monster and is wondering what really is happening. And behold means I saw. Says here another horn, but it's a little one that came up among them, and three of the previous horns were plucked out before it. So visually, we can look at it this way, that there is a little horn, right? A little horn. And with that little horn, we could say that no, then there were three of the first horns plucked out. So we can say one, two, and three horns were plucked out. So now it leaves seven horns instead of 10, plus a little horn. Now that's the picture. Now you may be wondering, how can this ever happen? Please remember, this is in a dream, or in this case, we call it a nightmare. And so anything can happen in a nightmare. Anything can happen in a dream. It does not need to conform to the signs of the normal times that we live in. In a dream, many things can happen that defies logic and defies science. And in this case, it is trying to communicate to us a message. So we should not be distracted by the details, but we should be following what the message is. The first three monsters were depicting the three kingdoms. And in verse 24, that's exactly what it is. The four beasts are four kingdoms. But in this case, there are details or highlights that Daniel is giving. When we continue to observe, it says, "Behold, this horn possessed eyes like human eyes, and a mouth uttering great boast or great arrogance." Now, what does this mean? So you can think of this horn in this way, where this horn has eyes like human, and it possesses a mouth that talks a lot. And so we are seeing a very strange horn. But the horn is giving us human expressions, arrogance, boasts, if you like to say that. It is speaking great of himself. I think speak great of himself. And we call this arrogance. And it means that Daniel actually can hear what is said. Otherwise, how would you know that it's arrogance and it's not just lips moving? And so when we read such verses, there are certain details that is, I guess we can call it, in between the lines. And here we find that when it says great arrogance, it is something that he can hear what is said. The mouth is moving and sounds are coming out that Daniel understands, and he concludes that it is arrogance. It is speaking about himself greatly, lifting himself up. And he says human eyes would mean that he can actually blink as he speaks. It is not a human, but it's in the form of a horn. And so horns are kings. And the beast is the same kingdom. And with the kings, we get a small king, but he talks a lot about himself. So that would be as far as we need to go, because the dreams highlights that Daniel gives does not give any more, doesn't tell you how big, how long, how tall, the color of the horns, the sound, how big the eyes is, how gigantic is this monster. And all of these details were left out. Why? Because it's not important. Whatever was given to us should be sufficient so that we look at this particular monster and these particular details, we can actually figure out the kingdom. Now, in verses 7 and 8, based on these description, particular this word iron, and when we compare it back with the uh, dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, then we could actually suggest that this would be uh, the Roman Empire. So we have the Babylonian, the Medo Persian, the Grecian, and now the Roman Empire. Now, some have suggested that the 10 horns can be thought of this way. So, what we have now on the screen has been heavily suggested by many, many Jewish commentators because of these 10 horns. Can this fulfill the description of the Roman Empire? And they wrote this out that from Julius Caesar, and these are all Kaisers, right? They are all Caesars or Kaisers. You would find that we have 10 of them. One, two, three, four, five. Nero is six, seven is Galba, eight, 9, and 10. The last three are the most tricky ones. Why? Because there were three emperors in the same year. And so, what we have now in all these 10 uh, emperors, we do find that there appears to be a consensus as well. So, I'm just suggesting as a consensus of the Jewish commentators that all of these is fulfillment because the cutoff point was 70 CE of the destruction of the temple. Now, the destruction of the temple in Jewish thinking is a very important bookmark, and that would be the destruction of the second temple. The destruction of the second temple was made possible because of General Titus, who is the son of Vespasian. While Vespasian became king in 70 AD or 70 CE, he destroyed the temple and Jerusalem. And so it appears to show us that the 10 horns became the 10 emperors, and the little horn is General Titus. Now, that much is what most of the commentators will actually want to describe the horns itself, basically the horns itself. Now, what seems to be more of a challenge is that the removal of the three horns, right? The removal of three horns. What did that signify, and how did that fall into the description of the Roman Empire. Now, this in itself has been suggested that when the horn came about after the destruction of the temple, three of the horns disappeared. And it seems that the the kingdom that the little horn had created is now smaller because it took over the behavior of seven emperors, and three emperor behavior is gone now. That is very speculative. What these three is interpreted is that some people think that this horn is not Titus. It could be some religion that came about. Now, one of the things that is important for us to understand that there is a particular explanation that uh, Christian circles would also begin to think that this little horn becomes the Roman Empire that took on a religion in what we will call Christianity. And in so called Christianity, there were uh, ruptures. That appears to be a way of looking at it, where you get the Eastern churches breaking away, you get the uh, Coptic and Armenian and Syrian churches breaking away, and then finally, you get the Protestant church. So you get three groups: the Abyssinian church, the Eastern church, which became the Eastern Orthodox, and now the Protestant Reformation. Again, I would say that many of these are a bit difficult because it's not clear of what happened to three of the horns. The academic circles seem to think that the little horn is beyond Titus, it is Christianity, or the little horn is something else. And so I do not have a position that I could give you. I could only suggest to you what other people have said. But one of the clear things that I guess in my mind is that there is no absolute clarity about the disappearance of the three horns. That much I must admit, and I have not come across any suggestions that seem more logical and more reasonable. But by and large, the overall description of the monster fits the Roman Empire. We come to verse 9. Now, verse 9 says, I kept looking hard, looking closely until thrones were set up. Now, the idea of thrones were set up, these were seats. I think that in itself, while we call it thrones, these are seats. Thrones are actually seats, and it's in the plural. They were set up. Okay, they were set up. So that would be in a plural, more than one. And we find a very important description here. It says, the Ancient of Days took seat. The Ancient of Days is seen as God Himself. It is a expression of God Himself. And so the Ancient of Days, I won't even bother uh, drawing, uh, just to depict the Ancient of Days took his seat. And all these seats are for judgment. So he is the one that is primarily there. His garment was white, and the idea uh, of white again symbolizes purity, white as pure, purity, and the hair of his head was like pure wool, also purity. Now, white in the Hebrew understanding also symbolizes kindness. It also symbolizes charity. And so, white as snow, the head of pure wool. The other description is this: his throne or his chair was ablaze with flames, its wheels were a burning fire. Now, this is very strange, I would say, very strange. So we say there are wheels. What are these wheels? Now, I would consider that since we don't have any uh, details, it sounds a little like the book of Ezekiel, that there are wheels that is spinning around with burning fire, that it is on fire, right? It is on fire. And then his throne was ablaze with flames. And this flames is actually sparks of fire, of fiery flames. And so we need to know that this is a lot of fire under the seat. Remember, this is not literal. It is a vision. It is what Daniel is seeing. It is not burning as in cooking, like in the fiery furnace, but it is ablaze with some form of fire. It's not burning the chair, but it is there. It is there, but it's not burning anything. I think that would be a good way of looking at this. The seat was a flame and burning fire on the wheels and whatever the wheels may be. It is not burning up anything. And so the chair that the Ancient of Days is seated has that kind of an imagery. The next description is in verse 10. Now, verse 10 says this: a river of fire was flowing and coming out from before him. So, understand, if it was a river, so you think of a river, meaning something that is flowing out, but it's not flowing out water, it is flowing out fire. And so this is important for us to take note. Now, what do you mean by flowing out fire? I could imagine that this would be possibly lava, and this could be lava flows. As lava flows out, it catches flames, but it's hot and it's like a fiery river. And so it's flowing out. So that's what I would imagine. That doesn't say it's lava, but I am calling it lava, a lava flow that describes the immense power of whatever flows in front of the throne. And then it says here, thousands upon thousands were serving him. Uh, and myriads upon myriads were standing before him. The court convened and the books were open. So what we do see now is that it is a picture, it's an imagery, right? We have thousands upon thousands were serving him. Serving him would be serving the Ancient of Days. The idea of serving the Ancient of Days is that we should be aware this is the angels. And we call this thousands upon thousands, thousands of thousands. Now, how many would that be? Many, thousand of a thousand, uh, would would be, I guess, in the millions, right? Then you have the idea of myriad. This would be 10,000 upon 10,000. So myriad is 10,000 and thousand is a thousand. So it will be 10 times more. You can only imagine how many are there in a vision. Now, if you understand the language here, you find that Daniel didn't go around counting. Oh, you have 1,000 here. Oh, that's 10,000. He is basically using poetic language because there are so many who is serving the Ancient of Days, and these would be the angelic beings. And then you have myriads upon myriads that is standing up before him. Now, it appears that these are humans. Then the books were opened. Now, understand that these are not printed books. We are talking about scrolls, right? We're talking about scrolls. Scrolls on scrolls are open. The books were open, and the Jews were suggest that these books were about their transgressions. It is generally speaking about the terrible day of judgment. I guess this can give us a picture of Malachi in chapter 3 and in verse 23. This is the event of the great and terrible day. Now, I must say this, we don't have much description of this. The idea of this judgment would be books to read before the sentencing. So that would be important for us to take note. This is to be read before the sentencing. Now, I am moving ahead of myself. I'm saying things which begin to move beyond the text. So all we know is that we have books, and these are the books, which are scrolls. And that would be the things that the Ancient of Days will be using to judge. So this is a time of judgment served by angelic beings, and then there are many, many more humans to be judged, called the Great and Terrible Day. This is as much detail as we have, and there is no need to speculate any further because the further you go from this description of verse 10, the worse it becomes because we'll be trying to add information that is otherwise not there. All we do know is that this is a scene of the final judgment. This is a scene, but we don't know how final that is, and we don't know who would be. So all of these are things that we don't need to speculate, but we do need to know that this is what Daniel is seeing. I would not venture to develop a doctrine or a teaching based on a vision. But the message that is communicated to Daniel is something that we do read, and in this case of a judgment, something in Daniel chapter 12 and verse 2 later on also seems to allude. Now, I use this term allude, meaning it kind of suggests, but it doesn't say much. It is talking in passing. And hence, all we need to do is to acknowledge, yes, there seems to be this final judgment or the judgment of the Ancient of Days. No, we can read this, the Ancient of Days. He does the judgment seated down, and his judgment seat was incredible on his throne. It's the same picture in the book of Ezekiel. And then there's lava flowing out. And what else? There are angels that's there. And then there are what we would suggest humans. Myriads upon myriads, 10,000 upon 10,000 standing before him. Who are these? We're not told. Are these representative or symbolic of every single human being? We don't know. Are these representative of the Jews? Uh, might be. Why? In closing, before we end today, I want us to be very mindful that these dreams and visions that Daniel has with regards to prophetic events that's coming to identify Babylon and then Medo-Persia, the Grecian Empire, the Roman Empire, and what the Roman Empire may eventually entail, and then there is the final judgment. So these are things that is in the dream, but we cannot say what is in between, how long it takes, because it doesn't say. And so all these dreams have to do with Israel, have to do with these Jews in exile. It has nothing to do with everybody else. If it has, it is secondary. The primary focus of such messaging that God gives to Daniel in his dreams and vision, and now dreams because he has two of it and lots of visions, will be with regards to the Jewish nation or Jewish people or the nation of Israel as a whole. Such prophecies are not particular about everybody else. Such prophetic messaging is primarily about Israel. And I trust that we would learn the discipline not to read too much into the text, because one of the biggest challenges and dangers that one would have when you venture too far, looking too hard at the details and not understanding that the messaging is more general than that, then we would begin to add new information which is not there. If we treat this as God's words, as God's revelation to Daniel and now written down for us to read, we must respect the fact that whatever information given is enough for us to know what we need to know. And any more will be sheer speculation. And the moment you venture into abstract speculation, we would get into the danger of saying a lot of things that might sound somewhat plausible, but we would get into the area of fantastic with nothing to back up. And so that is one warning that I would suggest to us. Don't get too hung up on details that's not there. We should only read what is in the text. We should also infer what we can from the text. But beyond that, we should refrain from going too far off tangent. And we don't build doctrines based on visions and dreams, because it is about a message that God is bringing through Daniel in terms of what is going to happen from his time forward. And with this, we come to the end of our session today.